Okay, I see people are still coming in. So give it a moment or two longer.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that seems to be fairly stabilized. So let's get going. Welcome everybody. I'm Adrian Annika, as you probably know. Our guest today is Barbara Dale Jones, who is the director of the Field Institute, and you've seen her topic. Just a reminder about the rules for today. Please, your microphones and your cameras are going to be off, but we really do want this to be an interactive event. It should be a conversation. So please feel free to post questions in the chat box, and then I will moderate for Barbara, and I'll bring in whatever questions or comments you've got to make at what seems an appropriate time. So please, we encourage you. There should be a conversation. It's very dull and it's just a talk. So please do engage with Barbara. Barbara, over to you. Do you want to share your screen and take us through it?
Thanks very much, Andy. Yes, let me share my screen. Can you all see my slides?
Yes, come up.
Okay. Thanks so much for this opportunity. And just very briefly before I begin, to give you a little bit of background of me, as Andy says, I'm director of the Field Institute, which is a global consulting firm based in South Africa, but we work around the world. But I've got a very long history in education. I've worked in academia, in publishing, in e-learning, and learning and development for a long time. And part of the remit of the Field Institute is also learning and development. So I've got a deep knowledge of and interest in education. And ultimately, during the course of this half hour, I'm going to talk to you about something that's emerging in South Africa that we've been working on. But I want to start with a broader global perspective. And that's one that you're probably all very familiar with, but it bears repeating, which is that we're in a rapidly changing global context, and that applies to learning and development and credentialing too. So suddenly the divides between formal, non-formal and informal learning are much less apparent than they used to be. There's not the same kind of approach to learning and development. No longer is it the case that people do their training in the early part of their life and then go into a career and stay in a career. The idea that you move from career to career and have more than one career in your lifetime is now very common, more the rule than the exception. And the idea also that you need to continue on a lifelong learning journey is very common. You need to keep upskilling. You might also move across sectors, across borders, across lifespans. And so the recognition for your learning in all the forms, formal, non-formal, and informal, needs to be able to make those kinds of steps. There needs to be alignment between the world of learning and the world of work. And what we're also seeing is that formal qualifications have increasing competition from things like micro-credentials and other short course awards. So it's less commonly the case that university and full degrees is the only way to go. There are many major companies in the world that no longer require university education. And the idea of just-in-time learning is much more embraced, and often through non-traditional providers. So the idea of MOOCs, for example, and other forms of non-traditional providers is increasingly common.
Well, just a question from me. So my sense is that it is logical that people will start looking outside their immediate country-bound border for qualification. But when I've spoken about it with fellow South Africans, people look blankly at me. Do you think that it is a global thing and that we're lagging behind? What is your sense about what's happening?
Well, I'm certainly seeing in the corporate world that there's increasing use of foreign short courses, foreign qualifications. So I'm certainly not seeing that it's ubiquitous that people are not doing that. It might be that we're in general lagging in South Africa, and I suppose there's also things like exchange rates that might be rate limiting factors for the uptake of this in South Africa. But I think that, the fact that you can get onto the internet and do a course with the University of Virginia's Business School in Design Thinking and get a credential for that, that's a global credential. And you can do that within a couple of months. And the only thing that costs you anything is the credential itself rather than the course. That's an amazing value proposition for somebody, rather than all of the many pain points and the great time consumption of going through a more traditional approach to gaining a qualification.
And is your sense then that micro-credentialing is growing? It certainly seems to be growing in use globally. Is it growing in use here? Are people accepting them? Are employers accepting them as valid?
Very much so. That's very much my case. And employers are looking for the micro credentials that will help to accelerate their competitiveness. And so obviously a lot of that has to do with, 4IR, building the kind of metacognitive skills that are needed for the new world of work. So there's a whole different curriculum that's emerging now, and a whole different way of delivering that curriculum. So yeah, I'm increasingly seeing that. And then, obviously, the digital world in which we're operating allows for not only different forms of delivery and uptake, but different forms of recognition. And today's talk is about credentialing and a different kind of digital credentialing. And just one important point to make, sorry, Andy, I'll come to you now, about what the digital context has allowed us is it's allowed for the idea of data systems being more interoperable. So the idea of APIs that link data and allow for a more sort of seamless integration across data sets, across borders, across sectors, is now increasingly becoming, at least in principle, possible, even if in reality there's still a lot of issues around that. Sorry, Andy.
Two things. In a sense, then, if we don't get our act together, we get marginalized. And then also a comment from Jonathan Braun saying, perhaps a definition of micro-credentialing for a common understanding. Are you able to, in a nutshell, summarize?
Absolutely. So a micro-credential is a small, just-in-time pocket of learning that addresses a particular need. So it's not necessarily an integrated learning journey. It's not a full qualification or certificate. It's normally a discrete piece of learning. And increasingly, the Department of Basic Education and DHET are looking at how to address this issue of micro-credentialing. So they're drafting their own policy currently on how to acknowledge the need for micro-credentialing and include that as part of the qualification landscape that each individual will start to build up.
Delighted to hear that the information we're getting from them is, is to the contrary. When we've asked SACWA about micro-credentialing and similar, and we also, they're looking at much larger units of learning. And we look at the difficulties now, and one of the issues we're raising with SACWA and QCTO is there are a lot of certificates that people need to have to trade that might only require a 1-unit standard. Now they're doing away with the unit standards for the occupational certificates, and there doesn't seem to be anything that they've spoken to us about that's going to replace these. So it's a challenge.
So Trudy van Wyk at DHET, I think, is leading the policy development around micro-credentials. I haven't engaged with her for maybe 2 months, so I'm not totally up to date, but certainly it was in draft form about 2 months ago. And it is something that DHET and DB are actually actively looking at.
Glad to hear. Thanks, Barbara. I'll shut up for a minute and let you get on.
Okay. So I wanted to sort of build a quick picture of how the old world sort of looks regarding data and credentials, and then talk about the new world before we go into the specificities of decentralized credentialing. So in the old world, data belonged to central bodies, or maybe this is still the current world. Data belongs to central bodies, the education and training provider, the quality assurance body, even the relevant government department. And obviously, we're very familiar with the idea of data belonging to Google. Google knows more about you than your family. Facebook, Amazon, these are all madly digital companies that have an obsession with data and are gathering data all the time in order that they can deepen their share of wallet, essentially. And the world is rife with the possibility of fraud, data breach, a sort of inappropriate data consumption that we all feel concerned about. And the Cambridge Analytica scandal was just one example of that. But leaving aside those things, traditional systems like qualifications frameworks and even conventions involve data control. So the idea of a centralized data control where you've got identity that is issued to users by a third party. So if you think of something like your passport or your ID, those are credentials that you have, that we all have. You know, bank cards are another example of credentials. They're issued to you by a third party, and they're essentially owned and controlled by that third party. And in this world of central identity management, data tends not to be portable or to allow for easy mobility. What we're looking for in the new world regarding data and credentialing is that you have digital credentials rather than the physical ID book or the physical bank card. You need a digital credential that is private, that is secure, and that is verifiable, and addresses many of the pain points regarding fraud and loss and data breach and so on that existed in the sort of old paradigm. Then there is obviously with credentialing the need to include smaller just-in-time pockets of learning that lie outside traditional structures. So that talks to the micro-credentialing point I was making. And the whole potential is for a data-rich ecosystem that connects the world of work and appropriately skilled individuals who are actually able to operate effectively in pursuit of building the economy. I said earlier that interoperable data systems are part of what the technologies of the new world allow. And in principle, this means that you can have increased mobility and portability of learning data. And that's not just within a country's borders, but it's across borders, across systems, and so on. I want to move on to the idea of self-sovereign identity, which is part of this paradigm of decentralized identity. And the principle of self-sovereign identity, and this is something that is built on the blockchain, is that control over identity data shifts from central authorities to the individual. So I spoke to you just now about the old world being about centralized data, and what is currently a reality in the world is the idea that individuals in a decentralized way have control over their data, own their data, have agency with respect to their data. In this world, credentials are digital, they're private, they're secure, they're verifiable. And in this world, there's a peer-to-peer data exchange where no one party controls the relationship with the other. So what I want you to imagine is not traditional hierarchical paradigms that we see in traditional business structures, in the traditional family, in many of the traditional sort of governance models that we see in the world today and that we've seen historically. What I want you to imagine is a much more kind of decentralized hive structure, really, where there's a whole lot of nodes and where no one party controls the relationship with the other. I'm asking you to imagine a situation where instead of the Department of Home Affairs controlling your identity in the form of your ID number and your ID book, here it's a peer-to-peer data exchange that's much more equal. Now, what's allowed for the idea of self-sovereign identity is the blockchain. This is a technology that has cryptography at the heart of it and uses the technology of a distributed ledger and a decentralized blockchain where there is no central authority. So, you know, many people, I'm sure, know about the blockchain. You certainly undoubtedly will have heard about technologies like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies like that. They're built on the blockchain. And the whole idea of the blockchain is that you take away the central authority who controls everything in the data exchange. And instead, the cryptography allows for a a digital watermark which confirms who issued the data, when the data was issued, and that the data has not been tampered with. So I don't want to, I don't want to go into the specifics of how the blockchain works at this point. That's not my responsibility now, and I don't have the time for it. But I want to talk to you about how SSI, self-sovereign identity, could benefit learning and credentialing, and then very quickly talk to you about how it's being used in South Africa. So the first benefit of self-sovereign identity is that it allows individuals to prove securely who they are and what their education credentials are anywhere, to anyone, and at any time. The second is that it gives individuals direct access to and control over their educational credentials while maintaining the privacy of their data. And thirdly, it enables mobility and portability of learning as well as lifelong learning. Now, why is this important? Well, currently the situation is that if you want to apply for a job and you want to gather your CV together and you want to be able to prove that everything you're saying on your CV is true, there are a lot of pain points in that journey. You have to go off to third-party institutions, like let's say you did a degree at WITS. You need to go to WITS and say, please, can I have my transcript which proves that I did a BA? And please, can you prove what my scores were? And then you also need to get proof that you've got any other of your micro credentials and so on. What self-sovereign identity is allowing is for you to actually have all of these credentials in a digital wallet that you control on your phone, and that you can gather them together into a CV that is appropriate for what you're needing. So you have immediate access to and control over the management of these credentials, and you're able to demonstrate them to people. So, sorry, carry on, Andy.
So just a question. So, I mean, one of the log jams at the moment is the NLRD, and they're struggling to, I think they're a couple of years behind in what happens to things like the NLRD.
Well, and that's a very good question, and I can talk also more to that when we talk to the project, the PSET Cloud project as well, because that's a negotiation that's currently underway. The situation is currently maddening for people who are trying to apply for jobs and get verification out of the NLRD, and that can take a long time. It also costs. So there are a number of pain points that have to do with the cost in time, the cost in money, delays, and sort of bureaucratic frustrations around that. What's under consideration for South Africa is the possibility that all of those pain points can be removed by the build of a digital wallet. What SSI allows is for this to be instantaneous, for the demonstration of the credential to happen in real time. Without going into the technical details, it's a tripartite relationship between the individual who's done the learning. Let's say it's me, I've been to WITS, I've got my degree. Then WITS themselves has to, as part of the data exchange, verify that the claim I'm making vis-a-vis this qualification is indeed correct. And then this gets demonstrated to the third party who's able to then receive that information. This can happen on this decentralized blockchain using this technology called self-sovereign identity, where the owner can't make fraudulent claims because there needs to be the verification from a third-party provider. But nevertheless, the claim can be made and it can be verified in real time, and it can allow for the kind of demonstration of abilities that is needed in the real world when you're looking for work. You can't be waiting 2 years to demonstrate that you've got your BA from WITS. You have to be able to show it now if you're going to get your job now.
So just to check my understanding, Barbara, and then there's also a question from Sylvia Hammond we'll come back to. Let us say I get a qualification from WITS and then gets captured against my name. I don't once it's in the blockchain and is confirmed that it's the right stuff, I don't have to ever go back to Wits and say, I need another copy of it. They don't ever have to go and check their files and say, yes, he did actually get this thing. That's what you're saying.
That's correct. So that'll then be stored on the blockchain, and there'll be a digital record of that verification, and so that's there. And it's, as I said earlier, cryptographically secured. So you can't actually tamper with that and falsify that in the way that we're seeing with physical credentials.
Then there's quite a big question from Sylvia Hammond. So you might want to think about it. What are the implications for professional bodies and designations?
Can you just give me a little bit more about that? In what way are you asking about implications?
So do you want to put some more comments in, and then we can come back to it a little later on?
I've got some thoughts, but I think that's quite a wide-ranging question. So let me carry on and talk to you a little bit about the PSET cloud, and then maybe we can leave the last sort of 5 minutes or something to talk to questions like this. How are we doing for time? Okay.
9 minutes.
That's perfect. Okay, so post-school education and training, I don't want to talk sort of broadly about all education because, again, we don't have time for it. But with PSET, if you have this kind of decentralizing that I'm suggesting is possible because of the attitudes and technologies of the new world, you can have a situation in South Africa where citizens have digital identities that they are able to own and control, a digital CV with their education, training, etc. But the important thing is it doesn't just stop with the credentials, the formal credentials or the micro credentials. It will include non-formal and informal. It will include projects, skills, job history, assessments, things like voluntary activity. If you've worked at the local dog shelter, for example, that can be part of your identity record and digital identity that may attest to something about your character that you need to show a prospective employer. So suddenly, instead of individuals coming into jobs or looking for jobs and not really being able to demonstrate who they are, now they'll be able to bring a rich array of not just formal learning, but everything that says something about them. They'll be able to provide this data for verification without the need to rely on institutions. So that's to your point, Andy, or a central repository of data. So you get rid of the idea of central repositories and instead have interoperable connections between data. And with this kind of possibility, citizens will be able to turn their skills, training, and experience into genuine value in the labor market. So what we're really looking for with this kind of approach to decentralized identity management and decentralized credentialing is the idea that the labor market benefits, that the economy benefits. We're trying to do this in South Africa. So my final point is that there is a project that's currently underway called the PSET Cloud. It's now in its 4th year. It's a project being run by Jet Education Services and championed by the MERSITA. And the PSET Cloud is building an interoperable digital ecosystem whereby the education and training data of South African citizens will be contained in one interoperable, easy to access domain or ecosystem. And onto that ecosystem, we have built a self-sovereign identity protocol that will be launched later this year, where you will be able to start gathering your credentials of formal, informal learning, etc., as I told you earlier, and demonstrating those to prospective employers, etc., in real time, in a way that is cryptographically secured, cannot be defrauded, and where the agency over that data really resides with the individual citizen rather than anyone else. So we're in the process of testing this with 3 main stakeholder bodies. There's individual citizens who are looking for jobs, so primarily young South Africans looking for jobs. Secondly, there's the employers who are looking for people to fill jobs. And thirdly, there's the education and training providers who are obviously forming that kind of link between the citizen and the workplace. So this is actually being built and piloted in real time now in South Africa. If you don't know about the PSET Cloud, I really recommend that you go to the website address here and have a look at this in greater detail, because it's an absolutely groundbreaking, internationally groundbreaking piece of work that's being done, and it makes for a very exciting prospect for South Africa for learning and development and for how credentialing occurs.
So Barbara, a question from me, and then a further question comment from Sylvia. So let's say, for example, the ASDSA, we've got people with designations, and so we would then, somebody gets awarded a designation, we tell them about it, they log it into their blockchain account, and then it's there. And if it's a qualification, it's there for life. But our designations are annually renewable. So you've got to pay your fees, and you've got to do your CPD to remain current. Would we then have to interact with their blockchain to say, yes, they're valid for another year? Is that how it would work?
Well, they would sign up to a system like, let's say it with a PSET Cloud, and they were participating in it. They would become one of the parties in the PSET Cloud, and that would happen in an automated way, in the way that I've just described. So if you're needing to update CPD points, if you're needing to update a designation annually, that could be done using the blockchain, and there would be this kind of automatic verification taking place between the different data sets. So it takes away the direct interaction between the individual and, for example, the professional body.
So Sylvia's commented in question, I think you're part answering now. Currently, a professional body such as SABPP or ASDSA requests the qualifications, work experience, etc. So would the individual release a packet of info, like a CV, what is on the blockchain to the professional body? Then that is verified by a number of different third parties. That's
right. And you would be able to choose that. So what you choose to put into your CV if you're applying for a job might be different to what you're putting into a digital record if you're communicating with a professional body. And you would then gather whatever the credentials are that are appropriate to demonstrate to the professional body that this is who you are, and these are the CPD points that you gathered this year, and so on. So it would certainly make it a lot more seamless, I imagine. It would take away some of the bureaucratic hassle that my guess is that you face when dealing with professional bodies. I don't know that for certain.
Right. But it's not too bureaucratic. Listen, we're running out of time, and there are two things coming up still. Question from Sylvia: who controls the blockchain? How is that secured?
So nobody controls the blockchain. That's the point of the decentralization of this all, is that rather than having Department of Home Affairs as the controller, you have a blockchain as a technology that is cryptographically secure. So the cryptography secures the data. And in the blockchain, no one entity is more powerful than any other entity. It's decentralized, it's peer-to-peer, it's not hierarchical.
Okay. And then there's a comment from Jonathan. I anticipate serious challenges with the transition to SSI. There's bound to be a disconnect between all your identities that your ID is linked to, e.g. DHET, QCTO, SARS, DTI, Home Affairs, CETAs, SAQA. They will not align their systems and processes to seamlessly recognize process and work with a new form of identity. They cannot even synchronize their systems and processes with the transition from legacy qualifications to occupational qualifications. Barbara, your comment.
It's a very shrewd point, and it is difficult, although it's possible to have interoperable data ecosystems. Obviously, it is the case that you need to have the same kind of standards in data in order for them to talk to each other, but you also, more importantly, need to have political will, and there are a lot of vested interests in data. But we are chipping away at it. We're making progress. We are engaging with SAQA, with the Department of Higher Education, with professional bodies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a major national initiative. This is not a small project. I said it's being championed currently in pilot phase by the MERSITA, but this is a massive national undertaking, and it will bring all of these bodies into the same ecosystem. But I think the point is extremely well made, and it's not without political difficulty.
Well, more strength to you, Barbara. We're out of time. It's been a really interesting talk. So thank you very much for this.
That's a great pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Colleagues, please, CPD points, click on the link in the chat box. And then thank you very much and goodbye.